Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 29th and tonight's movie is Enys, Maine. Yes, that is how it's pronounced. I looked it up. This is a folk horror movie from the UK, and for those of you who don't know, folk horror is a type of horror that's very focused on a specific region's folklore. That term tends to have like a European slant to it, movies like Midsummer or The Ritual, but technically something like The Medium is folk horror for Thailand. This is apparently an experimental type of movie, and I've already talked about how maybe experimental, surrealist movies just aren't really my cup of tea, and I should stop putting them on the list of things to watch for horror nights. I have no clue what this movie's about. I watched the trailer and just showed a bunch of images. The movie does look pretty cool. It has like a celluloid film reel aesthetic, sort of like The House of the Devil. All I can gather is that there is a woman, she is on a little rock island, and things are happening. Kind of a red flag. When I was doing Google searches related to this movie, one of the recommended searches or like side questions that comes up is, what is the point to Enys, Maine? Which does not bode well. All the same, I'm going to go into this with an open mind and tell you my honest opinion about it when I'm done. This is another one of those movies that's light on plot, heavy on vibes, so I don't really need to split this up into two parts. I didn't really love this movie, but it wasn't super boring, and I could follow what was going on, which automatically puts it a step above most of these types of movies. I'm feeling generous. I'm gonna give Enys, Maine a 6 out of 10. The main character of Enys, Maine is this woman. She is never named, but I'm just gonna call her Red because of a distinctive jacket she wears a lot. And Red is like a researcher for this type of flower, and she's basically just taking stats of it every day on this little island. There's a lot of style and aesthetic in this movie. It's a very visual movie. There aren't a lot of words. It's like 7 minutes before we hear any talking and like 15 minutes before we hear any sort of dialogue. Most of this movie's story is told through its images and its score. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on, but it seems that there's some sort of like time loop or like a time sinkhole with this island. Even though Red is supposed to be completely alone on this island, she sees other people all across this movie, like she's used to it. Some of the reoccurring apparitions include a young girl, like a teenager, in like a blue shirt, a bunch of mining workers down underground, a bunch of little village children in white singing songs and playing little instruments, and herself. The fact that she keeps seeing herself among these spirits makes it seem less like the island is just haunted and more like there's some sort of rift in time happening. Events also occasionally happen out of order. The narrative of this story is centered around a lot of repetition. From what I can tell, all Red has to do is like put a temperature probe in the ground near the flowers, then drop a rock down a hole just to see how deep it is, or maybe that's just something she's doing out of habit, and then writing stuff down in this little log. When something happens that interrupts that routine, the movie like really focuses on that. There's also like a set piece in this movie that's like I think it's just a rock. It could also be like a really worn down, weathered statue. We see it every day in this movie, and there's this one point where it just disappears, and the movie like really hones in on that, focuses on the place where it would be. The score is freaking out. A similar thing happened when Red finds lichen growing on the flowers. Like the score is just going all out. But there are also some really subtle, quiet moments in this movie. There's a lot of shots of the waves, and a couple of them are played backwards, and it's not something I noticed right away. But certainly the most concrete and direct horror element to this story is that Red has this giant scar on her abdomen. It's like a C-section scar, only it's a lot bigger and it's like diagonal. And once she starts finding the lichen growing on those flowers, she also finds that same lichen growing out of her scar. And I don't know what that exactly means, but it can't be good. I think that the biggest issue I have with Enys, Maine is that it can be boring sometimes. It's baked into the plot that a lot of it is very repetitive. Red doesn't really have much to do on this island. But it does do enough things to keep things fresh, to stop it from being straight up like Skinamarink boring. It's also like fittingly short considering how simple the premise is. Also, miraculously, It had an ending that actually made sense in the context of the story. Throughout the movie, you keep getting the impression that Red is being slowly consumed by whatever is happening on this island, and the lichen on her scar keeps growing. More things happen, and her grip on reality is slowly slipping, and it ends with her holding one of the flowers, standing at the spot where that statue was, and then suddenly there's like a cut, and the statue is back, and she's gone, but the flower is on the ground. And I don't know if the implication is that she just disappeared and that's the flower that she dropped, or when she disappeared, a new flower reappeared. It is a simple but effective ending for this movie. Enys is like one of those artsy movies made more for people like me. It's like dipping your toe into the style. It's heavy on the atmosphere, but not so much so that it just becomes super boring. And while it is sort of abstract and jumbled, it's not incomprehensible. It's sort of like The Lighthouse, except it's not as long and also not as oppressively miserable. To sum up, it is an okay movie. Alright, thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.